and we're so happy that Brie Arthur could join us. And thanks to Linda from Central Texas Gardener for recommending Brie. She's been on the program a few times, and she has a new book and we're so happy that Brie Arthur could join us. And thanks to Linda from Central Texas Gardener for
trying to
recommending
get the live
Brie.
stream going at the
She's
same
been on
time.
the program a few times.
Let me just mute it. Sorry, everybody. Technical difficulties. Yeah. So with that, I'll let Brie take it away and talk about gardening with grains.
Okay, I am also having technical difficulties, so hang on. I have to find you again and share. I was trying to share my screen and I touched something on my computer.
Do you see a share screen at the bottom?
That's what just disappeared. Okay, here you guys are. Got it.
Okay. Sometimes the window.
Golly, nothing like a hot flash right before giving a talk, right? Okay, so let me pull this back up. And hang on, if I do that, there we go. Okay, now are you seeing, which are you seeing?
We see a cat on a porch and a.
No, you're not seeing the right screen. All right, hang on. Golly, this shouldn't be this hard. All right, there we go. How about now?
There we go.
All right, excellent. You'd think that I don't ever go on Zoom. And the thing is, I am on Zoom endlessly, so I have zero excuse for these problems. Other than I only recently learned that my screen is actually a touch screen. And so with that, I will let you know that I am a much better gardener than I am a computer person, which is why gardening is such a passion for me. I'm so happy to get to be with you all today, though I would much rather be in Austin and help you all get ready for the cold snap. You know, I'm able-bodied and excited. So let's see, let me get my screen to advance. Here we go. My name is Brie, and I am a horticulturalist. My background is actually in ornamental plant production. And in 2014, I had the opportunity to join Growing a Greener World, which is a nationally syndicated gardening show on PBS. And that kind of totally changed my life and my career. And it really put the spotlight on my home gardening obsession versus what I used to do in the industry, was very specifically producing trees and shrubs and perennials. At home, I was obsessively growing food. And it's been a real pleasure now to get to share some of my ideas for home gardening. I think that we have a lot of opportunity that hasn't totally been realized. I am based in Raleigh, and I'm originally from southeastern Michigan. And I've never lived in Texas, but I used to come to Texas like 6 times a year. And so I wanted to share some pictures from some of my visits to your area, specifically Springdale Farm, which I got to spend a day with, and I was there with Linda. We made an episode for Central Texas Gardener. We had so much fun. And it was really great to be able to sort of compare the differences between gardening in Austin versus gardening in the Southeast. We're much colder, except this week. We're not going to be as cold as you guys, and I'm really sorry, because I know exactly the chaos that forecast gives you. But we're much more acidic where I live, and so growing vegetables is very different. And I'll keep acknowledging that all night long. Last time I was in Austin was actually in early November, not this year before last, before the pandemic. And I just couldn't believe how much food could be produced there. because when I had never been there before, and I had mostly spent time in East Texas, specifically in Nacogdoches. I have a lot of friends who work in the horticulture department at SFA, and they always basically refer to the rest of Texas as like the barren wasteland because of the alkalinity. And so when I got there and I saw this lush vegetation and like the world's best kohlrabis, I was like, okay, Dr. Creech, I'm not sure what you're saying, but I don't think that the only place that you can garden is Nacogdoches. I have some other friends in Austin. So when I come to visit, I get to get carted around, and like anyone, I eat really well when I'm in Austin. Austin's hands down my favorite city in the United States. I had a lot of fantasies about relocating there pre-pandemic. Now I just am kind of like in my office. I don't dream anymore, I guess. That's terrible, but it's true. But I've had a great time exploring with Scott Ogden and well, this whole gang. If you're not familiar with Adam Black, Adam is brilliant. He's also a mycologist and a herpetologist, and he was director of the John Ferry Garden down closer to Houston. So yeah, Austin to me is just full of visions of bright, brilliant, dry, tropical, subtropical experiences, and it's very, very different from where I live. We've already had like 15 and a half inches of rain in 2021. So, I mean, I'm about to float away. Like my whole yard is just standing water, and we have a whole week of rain ahead. And then all weekend it's supposed to snow. But honestly, I'll take the snow because it's insulating, whereas like 9 degrees with nothing is actually much worse. So I'm sorry, I'm commiserating. But I do want to acknowledge that it's very different growing food where you are. Your cycle is completely different than mine. And so everything that I'm going to tell you today, I've tried to convert to the best of my knowledge, but it's really, I'm here for inspiration, not to give you literal plant this on this day with this product advice, because I don't like when people like from England come to Raleigh and assume that, everything that they do in England works here. And I don't like to assume that what I do here works for everybody else. So that's kind of my disclaimer. And tonight we're really going to sort of talk about the convergence of agriculture and home gardening. Being a Midwestern native, I've always been very inspired by agriculture. I was introduced to horticulture as a young 4-H kid. My local extension agent took me under her wing and taught me botanical Latin. And, I would have never even known that horticulture is something that I could study, get a degree in, and have a flourishing career with. So I'm really grateful for all that extension agents offer. But what I really try to examine is, in a regional area, what are farmers doing that's good? What are farmers doing that maybe long-term posing problems environmentally? And then how, as home gardeners, can we, take that concept and flip it and make it actually converted to the space that we manage? Because home gardeners, have the luxury of, we're not necessarily dependent on everything that we grow. We still can go to the grocery store. How can we have a gentler hand in managing our land and being better stewards and employing proper organic methods? And so that's not just, buying a bunch of, things from the garden center and using plant tone on them. That's actually looking more at the full cycle of, a soil biome and how soil can feed plants, and then how our very intentional use of plants in our gardens and our methods for composting can ultimately make it so that our footprint on the land is significantly more sustainable, and something that I would hope could be then translated more to the landscape industry to improve the techniques that landscape contractors employ. Very concerned about some of the chemical applications that landscape contractors seem very addicted to. Like they can't bend over to weed. They have to hit everything with Roundup because they love having a backpack sprayer on. And I'm always trying to show the industry alternatives that are economically feasible, visually stimulating, maybe something that they could even offer at a higher price because homeowners would value it greater. And that's really what led me to grains, because as an avid vegetable gardener, I have a lot of issues with disease and root knot nematodes. I live in a former tobacco field, and I just was struggling to keep like heirloom tomatoes alive. And I usually grow about 150 different varieties of heirloom tomatoes, and they were a really important part of my summer garden. And to watch them die one after one really crushed my soul. It made me feel like a failure. And so I really started evaluating how I could improve my soil through my home gardening methods. And that was what led me to grains. So grains specifically are cereal crops in the Poaceae family. So when you think about grains in a broad spectrum, they're really not any scarier or any different than the turf you walk on or the ornamental grasses that are native. They're just, annuals that have edible seeds. So why wouldn't we be growing them, right? Now, grains as a word, as a marketing term, I guess I should say, is kind of inaccurate. And that's why I tend to use the word cereals and pseudo cereals. So grains, are things like barley, corn, millet, oats, rice, rye, sorghum, wheat. Pseudo cereals, which are also considered to be grains, at least when you buy them at the grocery store, are non-grain plants, but that are seed crops. So those seeds can either be ground or they can be eaten whole, like chia or amaranth or, buckwheat, quinoa, things like that. You can grow all of these, but what I'm going to be very specifically talking about are grains proper, cereal grains in the grass family. Now, there is some more confusion about the word grains, and I think this is what happens with marketing. Like words suddenly don't have meaning, like organic. There's a lot of different interpretations. I wish there weren't, but there are. Or sustainable. We get into grains and then it gets mixed up because you can charge more if you label it as an ancient grain, right? It sounds exotic. Well, ancient grains refer to basically all grains. All grains are ancient. They're all more than 3,000 years old in cultivation. Actually, most of the archaeological studies will show that they're really between 12 and 20,000 years old. So they're all ancient, that's just ridiculous to even have that label. They're not GMO'd, so that's good. And actually, I will address GMOs in a bit, but to get to your concerns, a lot of our grains aren't genetically modified. Most specifically, corn is, and it's sad to me that corn is the only Western hemisphere native grain, and it's the one that we've mutilated the most, very specifically through the transition of modern breeding to GMO. But there are a lot of grains that you can grow as a home gardener or that you can buy that are grown commercially that have no genetic modification. So you don't have to really be that concerned. Now, one of the main distinctions in cereals is that they're wind pollinated, and this is why they are so practical. They set a ton of seeds because they're not depending on any bugs. This is also what leads to some of the dysfunctional conversation about pesticide use, because technically they're not killing pollinators because pollinators don't hang out in fields of grains. So when they're putting out a systemic pesticide in a grain field, it's to kill a problem bug, and they're very easily justifying it. Now, they do attract wildlife, and I'm a cat lady, so you'll see cats tonight. But my cats love to eat these grains, and then they come inside and vomit. So, be warned. If you've ever seen seed bags called cat grass, so that's just oats. That's literally just Avena sativa. And, like you germinate it in a pot and you have it there for your cats to nibble on so they can, throw up in the corner. But you can grow those oats out in your garden and discourage your cats from eating them because no one likes to clean that up. But they actually will attract a lot more than just cats. They really are important for birds. And when I first started getting into grains, I was actually really mad that the birds kept stealing so much of my seed because I was wanting to grow it to eat it. But then at some point, it just like occurred to me like, hey, you don't have to buy bird seed. You can just grow your own bird seed. And you know that it's organic and it hasn't been treated with a pesticide because it's fresh and it's from my yard. And as a result of my growing grains, I have increased the birds that visit my yard just like tenfold. It's really remarkable. And now that I have neighbors that have gotten excited about the low maintenance, the low cost, and the birding ability, I have people growing sorghum like all over my neighborhood now because they like to watch the birds come in and eat it. So where should you grow them? Well, it's like any vegetable, not under a live oak tree. I mean, there's a reason that farmers don't grow in the forest, and you need to be in more sun than shade. They don't like shade. They don't produce well in shade. They grow really small. I have zero experience with grains in Texas, but I'm assuming that Texas, I know they grow grains in Texas, and I know that they grow them in big open fields of full sun. Now, your irrigation, you're likely to need more irrigation, particularly through the summer season. However, you'll see that a lot of the summer grains, particularly sorghum that I recommend, are extremely drought tolerant. They're native to Africa. So they do really well in the condition of Texas. Whereas here, where we get, last year we had like 78 inches of rain. We're in a real wet period here in the Southeast. 78 inches of rain actually makes everything flop over and it's just kind of a disaster. So think of this in the winter season, which a lot of these grains that I'm going to talk to you about are best sown in November, December, and they grow all winter long, then you really won't need to use a lot of supplemental irrigation because winter, the days are shorter, the temperatures are lower, and the plants aren't absorbing nearly as much. So I focus on sunny landscapes and lawns, and I think that it's really important that we all have a little discussion about turf. It's like, I'm not on a mission to tell everybody that grass is the worst thing ever. However, we have a lot of lawn, and lawn is generally not managed sustainably or organically. Like the worst things in the chemical world are made for turf applications. So maybe we could think a little bit outside of just, 5 acres of consecutive lawn that you have to mow every week. I know this may not be exactly the picture of Texas, but everywhere I've traveled in the United States, I say every yard could do with 10% less turf. That's 10% more landscape space where you could be growing native plants, food crops to feed yourself, food crops to share with your community in need, plants that benefit your local ecosystem. Like, it's just, grass doesn't address any of that. So my motto is not no grass, it's just less grass. Let's do something better with all this land. 40 million acres of turf, by the way, and that's from 2015. So, they've developed more land in the last 6 years, so there's more turf because every land that gets developed ends up with a carpet of grass on it. So one of the things that I was very inspired by when I first got interested in grains was seeing what they were doing at Chanticleer, which is a wonderful garden outside of Philadelphia. If you ever have the opportunity, it is well worth visiting. I really consider it to be the best garden in the United States. They're also, they have the biggest endowment. So money is not an object at this garden. So It may not be there for literal interpretation for your own use, but it's a very inspiring space. And they have this garden called the Serpentine Border. And every year they do different crop rotations as a nod to the past use of agriculture on this land. And in this case, they were growing barley. And I just think it's really elegant and beautiful. I like the juxtaposition between the barley and the lawn, the mown lawn. So you can walk right up to it, and you know it looks clean. It reads is very intentional. And then as that barley developed, it just got more and more and more beautiful. And my big question was, well, how much beer did you get from it? You know, I mean, if you drink beer, you consume barley. That's it, right? And so the thing is, they didn't do it. They didn't follow through. Well, that was all I needed. I decided that I had to do this experiment for myself. And so I grew 800 square feet of barley in my front yard that was designed very specifically to mimic the garden at Chanticleer. And we ended up getting 4 pounds of barley seed, which ended up equating, and I didn't make the beer, but I have neighbors that do. And I didn't get pictures, which is a shame because it was right when quarantine started. And so like no one saw one another, but they ended up getting 10 growlers of beer from my front yard barley, which I thought was really cool. This year I have I think almost 2,000 square feet of barley planted because I want to have I don't know, a keg of beer or something. So ultimately growing greens it's just made me better at things. It's made me more thoughtful, I think. It certainly made me a better gardener, and I'm way more aware of what I'm eating and what I'm cooking. And I'm actually a terrible consumer. The pandemic hasn't helped, but I don't buy a lot. So growing grains made me buy even less because I started making my own flour, and then I was making my own bread and my own flour tortillas, and I was actually buying significantly less of what we would really consider staples as a result of this big experiment. I also discovered there's a lot of grains that are gluten-free. I have a number of food allergies now, which is unfortunate. And so I've had to cut out a lot of gluten. However, I've been able to reintroduce it. I don't have celiacs, which is really a huge relief. But for about 6 months, I went totally gluten-free, and I was still able to eat a lot of greens. And the advantage of greens is that they fill you up, and they have a really high percentage of vegetable protein. So they are actually very nutritious. Now, white bread isn't nutritious. Like white flour, bleached flour, doesn't have any of the nutrition left in it. However, when you're using whole grains, you will not only get a great deal of nutrition, but you will feel full faster. And that's the reason that grains are so important globally. Americans are really privileged in that we can, discount carbs because we have alternatives at the grocery store. But, there are people all over the world who don't have the opportunity to say, oh, carbs make me fat, when all they're trying to do is be able to get enough food to be able to exist. And I like to try and remind Americans to not be so bluntly arrogant in our dismissal of why food is valuable globally. Whether it fits into your specific facet of privilege is for you to decide, but don't just say all corn is bad, because corn is actually really, really critical for feeding the global population. So growing grains really made me more critical of what the word local means. It drives me crazy that these words don't have meaning, but they don't. So, you go to a restaurant that sources local, and you start to think really critically about what you're eating and where it came from. And suddenly they serve you rice, or they serve you a baguette, or they serve you locally brewed beer in which none of the ingredients were grown locally. right? All the hops are coming from Oregon. All the barley is coming from Idaho. It's not local. Like the only local ingredient is the water that they're brewing with. So like, why are we paying more for this concept of it's better, it's superior in some way, when the only thing that's local is their salad? The salad isn't the critical ingredient in the dinner that you've just paid $50 for. And so I became really conscientious of this, specifically here in the Raleigh-Durham area, where we've just had this local movement pop up, and it's only like 10% of the ingredients are actually sourced from local organic farmers. That to me doesn't get to count as local. So it also got me to be a lot more aware of the dysfunction of how big agriculture works with cereal crops, because we aren't paying attention to that. Like, we're thinking more about the fresh produce in the produce section, right? You want that broccoli to be labeled organic, but when you go to the bread aisle, they don't even have like organic as an option, right? So when I dove into this, I really started to realize how disconnected we are from our staple foods and having an understanding of how those staple foods are cultivated. So some of the things you really do want to be aware of are the synthetic fertilizers that are applied that kill any microbial activity in the soil. And then very specifically, the systemic fungicides and the systemic pesticide applications, which are really problematic. However, the persistent herbicides are probably the biggest problem. And there's, none of this is black and white. That was the main takeaway I had when I started researching and writing the book, is how I no longer got to see right or wrong, good or bad. It was like, well, there's a reason that they applied this persistent herbicide, but then there's a consequence for their application of it. And so, how can we as consumers and how can we as home gardeners make a change to change the standards in that? So the systemic pesticide, the systemic persistent herbicide is really leading to a massive problem in long-term compost use. So this is specifically for people using horse manure, because horses don't have multiple stomachs versus how cows do. The herbicide doesn't go away in their digestive system, and they go to the bathroom and then you apply that in your garden, and the herbicide is actually still active for between 5 and 7 years. So yeah, it's a huge thing and no one's talking about it. And the National Compost Council hasn't set standards or regulations for people distributing compost to actually test it before they sell it. So it's completely insane and absurd that this is even happening. And last summer, just in the county that I live in, we had over 50,000 cases of killer compost in home gardeners reported to the Extension Service. So like the biggest compost supplier is selling compost with active herbicide in it. And then the crazy thing is, the homeowners are blaming their neighbor's lawn care company for overspray of Roundup. And it's not that. It's the compost that you're growing in. So there isn't a solution. My recommendation is understand what your compost is made of, get a small amount of it, and basically put it in a pot and put in some either pea seeds or bean seeds. And if they germinate and look funny, if they come out with contorted leaves or they have yellow splotches, that means you have active herbicide in that compost. That's really the only thing you can do. I've been fortunate enough to team up with a local compost supplier that controls all of the little bits that are put into their system, but they only distribute to Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina. So I don't want to tease you with that because you'd have to drive here to get it. All right, so how do you grow grains? Well, my first recommendation, especially for people who have never done it, is to just grow them in a container. Get used to the idea. Like you're gonna spend like 99 cents on seeds. So like for $1, this could actually be a really, really fun experiment for you. So the process is, though, it's ridiculously easy. And I'm gonna repeat it a couple times, but you fill your container with soil. You scatter the seed on top. Now, the critical thing here with all of these grains, they need to be grain seed that's ready for germination, not necessarily for grinding, okay? Because sometimes the grain seeds have actually been heated and then they don't have an endosperm, so they won't germinate. So like you can't go to the store and buy a bag of white rice. That's not going to germinate. You have to buy rice with the hulls still attached through an agriculture or seed supplier. I have all that information in here, but it's always a question that people ask. So you're just going to scatter the seeds right on top of that soil, and then you can mulch it lightly. I use triple shred hardwood. Any mulch will do, or you can just put a little layer of soil on top of that. They usually germinate between 4 and 6 days, but I say 2 weeks just so that no one freaks out. But like in this case, this was 5 days after I sowed. That's barley seed, by the way. 5 days it took to germinate. And then what you end up with through the season is just this clump of grass that looks like an ornamental grass. This happens to have edible seed that will grow in the pot. And you can mix in other ornamental plants, or like in these pots, this was a mix of beets and Swiss chard, nasturtiums and wheat. Sorry, my kitten. She's like a Zoom expert. So I did some experiments on this. We did 3 5-gallon fabric bags. No, I have that backwards. I'm sorry. We did 5 3-gallon fabric bags. So five just in a row. And we got enough flour. You see my handy Wonder Mill there, that we were able to have enough flour for we needed 6 cups of flour. And we made 1 loaf of bread from those 5 3-gallon pots. So no, you're not gonna never buy bread from the grocery store again. The fact is that I got to make a loaf of bread from something I grew, and it was something I had never done before in my life, and it was really cool. It was an authentic experience, and I got to teach Abby something really interesting too, like where does bread come from, right? Because actually, if you were to ask, just like the average American, they wouldn't really be able to tell you that bread is made from wheat and this is how you grow wheat. So if you want to grow it in the ground, you have a couple options, but growing it in clumps is usually, again, where I like to start people, because it reads as very organized. It reads just like it looks with an ornamental grass. We're all used to the look of ornamental grasses, and I love them, and they're native, and it's fantastic. So I grow greens right alongside things like Muhlenbergia and Panicum. So you can grow them like this very easily. It's the same process as the pot. It's just that you're doing it in your soil. So I usually, with a hard rake, will just rake a hole that's like 3 foot around, and then you scatter the seed. You can see I do my seed pretty dense because I want these to look like thick clumps. And then they germinate in place. And then ultimately they will turn amber, and you can harvest them at that stage, or you can leave them up and the birds will eat it. Now, my favorite way to grow greens is in a mixed meadow. I really like the new naturalism movement. I like the combination of lots of plants together, and I really value ecosystem services. So not growing a monoculture of greens is really important. Being able to mix it in with some other flowering plants that benefit things like swallowtail caterpillar or swallowtail butterflies and monarchs, I think is really important. So for doing this method, you're not necessarily like digging holes. What you will be doing is scattering seed on top. So what you want to do, depending on your soil, is add about 1 inch to up to 6 inches of compost to be able to direct sow into. And what we always do, I like doing this mix of wheat and larkspur. We also add poppies, bachelor buttons, different spring flowering things. We grow them all together. And so we direct seed all of this at one time. And here are the things that you can direct seed for the warm season. So for you guys, that's going to be relatively soon. Like this is your post-frost planting. So maybe what, mid-March, beginning of April, you guys are pretty clear by then. Although who knows, like I wouldn't count on anything weather-wise anymore. But so these are plants that I'd recommend direct sowing for this mixed meadow method for the warm season. Here are the plants that I recommend direct sowing for the cool season. And so really I distinguish cool season as typically starting around Thanksgiving when the days are shortest, starting to get really short. And the ground is getting cooler. It might not be cold, but it's cooler than it was in August. And all of these plants really thrive without the addition of irrigation and really without the addition of very much fertilizer. Now, what you're looking for is ground plane coverage. And I cannot stress this enough. I really think ground plane coverage is what's missing from the American landscape. It's why we've become so dependent on Roundup. Because everywhere that you have open space between plants is an opportunity for weed seeds to set in and establish. So if you have all of that ground plane, engaged, you're going to have less opportunity for problem plants to be able to move in and establish. So, that's a sort of a vision of what that is. Now, in the case of this border that's in my middle of my front yard, we actually hand harvest all of the spring seeds. So we do rotations of oats, wheat, and barley. And we hand harvest everything just like this. We leave the stalks in place and we mow all of that organic matter back down. So this would be similar to what farmers do with combines, where they're doing like a no-till approach. And, all of that organic matter, instead of going onto a compost pile, is actually being composted in place. So because all of these grains are annuals, their root systems will melt into the ground, adding organic matter, but their roots are really deep. They act as tillers, so they have a lot of different advantages here. But then all of that hay, that straw that you're cutting down, is also full of an incredible array of macro and micronutrients that will ultimately break down and feed the next round of plants that you grow in this space. So the mow in place method is really, really, I think, the trick for easy maintenance. The first year I did this, I didn't know to do this, and I cut and pulled the roots out of all of this 800 square feet bed of wheat. And it took me 4 days. And now I usually get child labor to come over to help harvest. So the harvesting part is the thing that takes the most amount of time. We used to get the junior master gardeners to come and they would do it in 15 minutes, like 30 hands of 12 to 16-year-olds, and they get it done so fast. It is just the most remarkable thing. But now when we do this method for the cleanup and replanting, it only takes us 45 minutes. And we're not wasting any of that organic matter. All of it is staying in place. So all that shredded organic matter will break down depending on temperatures and irrigation or rainfall, usually between 30 and 45 days. And ultimately, those stalks will melt into compost and improve your soil. And then it makes it really inexpensive and efficient to be able to turn this land over and do different crop rotations each season. So soil improvement is my #1 focus and really the reason that I grow grains. And the root systems are the main part of this. So often the roots of these winter annuals will grow between 36 and 54 inches deep. Like that is the natural rototilling. You don't ever have to use a rototiller when you use grains to do the work for you. And it's also an incredible amount of breaking up hard pan soil and then allowing for better airflow, but also better water filtration through your ground surface. So let's talk a little bit about cover crops, because it's kind of a loaded idea lately, and it shouldn't be. I mean, the main idea is simple. You're just covering the ground so that weeds can't get established. I think it's really important to be aware of rotating grains and legumes, and I really want to sit in on that webinar tomorrow. So you might see me, Angel, on that. But for me, when I started growing legumes, very specifically nitrogen fixing legumes, remember, not all legumes fix nitrogen. It completely changed my approach to fertilizing, and it made my garden so much more healthy. I haven't had as many disease problems. I've had a significant reduction in insect infestations, and I've had much higher yields. And that's because I'm not relying on any sort of artificial fertilizer. I'm really letting all of these plants and this organic matter feed the plants naturally. So legume cover crops include all of these. I really like crimson clover. I'm very concerned about vetch becoming invasive in my condition. So I don't typically recommend growing vetch, but I've had a lot of success with different clovers. Certainly faba beans. Not only are faba beans really great as a legume, but they're really pretty. They have a beautiful flower. Soybeans, I haven't had as much success with. The rabbits always eat them. My cats actually are guardian angels to rabbits. They just watch them, make sure that nobody spooks them. My cats aren't real ambitious, so they have food bowls inside. But peanuts through the summer season are a plant that I think everybody should grow, unless you're allergic, and then don't grow them. Now, non-legume cover crops include a lot of the cereals, of the proper cereals that we're talking about, but also include pseudo cereals like buckwheat, and then greens like mustards and rape, and forage radish, which is also the daikon radish. Now, some things that I consider to be really good cover crops for the cool season include this list of greens. And what I recommend is that you mix them together. You buy the seeds, you put them in one bag, you shake it up, and then you distribute that. And what you end up with is a really beautiful patchwork that's entirely harvestable. You can grow your own salads this way. I also recommend root crops, especially if you live in an area with difficult soil. Daikon radish specifically, which is in this photograph, is really nature's very best rototiller. But turnips and rutabagas, even carrots and parsnips are also really good for adding aeration to compacted soil. And then cool season flowering crops. A lot of times flowers are thought of as not being as significant, but from a pollinator perspective, these plants are really, really important to include. And actually all of these plants have deep tap roots, which is why they have to be direct sown. They won't transplant. So you have to put this seed down on the ground where you want it to grow and leave it alone, which is actually the very easiest thing that you could ever do as a gardener. It's like the least amount of effort. So I talked a bit about ground plane coverage, and these are some of the reasons why I think it's so important. But it also means that you can't be applying pre-emergent herbicides. And I trust just by the name of this group that you're not doing that. But if you have your neighbors have a lawn service, they're likely putting out pre-emergent herbicides that could potentially run off in stormwater. So just be aware of that. When you're direct seeding, you can't be putting out something that's going to inhibit seeds from germinating. It's amazing how many landscape contractors don't actually understand what pre-emergent herbicide is. So I put in some weed control information just because people always ask about weeds, and I spent like 2 hours today on my hands and knees just weeding. It's very, very relaxing. I mean, it might be because I'm just desperate to go outside, but it was like the best day I've had of 2021. So I was really excited to get to spend the night with y'all. Hand weeding to me is always the solution. You learn a lot about your garden when you're down up close and personal. But, home gardeners always ask about vinegar. Don't use vinegar, you guys. It's not good. It's not better. It's not. It's straight up not better. It's actually worse. It can really do a lot of damage to amphibians. If you're going to use it, just do it on hardscape spaces like your driveway or patio. But even then, it's not better. I don't like using Roundup, but if you have a terrible weed infestation, honestly, one application of Roundup is safer than an application of vinegar. Some other things that you guys would probably not be using, but just because I think it's good for you to be informed, these are things that landscape contractors might be using, or really maintenance or lawn care companies. So let's talk about our grains specifically. So I've broken them down into 2 seasons, cool season and warm season. Cool season grains prefer cool soil and cooler air. And they want to be planted in your climate late fall, maybe late fall, just late fall. Anytime really, I say between Christmas or between Thanksgiving and Christmas. That's your best window. The cool season grains include barley, oats, rye, and wheat. And again, best sown in your condition, I think November or December is better than October. So a little bit about each. In the book, I distinguish them by different categories. And barley is the most beautiful plant that I have ever grown in my life. It is truly the beauty queen. I always call it Miss America, even though it's actually like native to Eurasia. But barley is actually really practical because it used to be the barley standard. You know how we have the gold standard now? So barley used to be the standard, but not just for currency. It was also for measurement, as in length and in weight. And if you ever wondered what American shoe sizes are based off of, because they don't really make any sense, right? They're based off of barley corns. That's barley seeds. So like I wear a size 7 shoe. If I put 7 barley seeds, it's exactly the size of my foot. So that's actually what the American and British shoe sizes are based off of. A measurement that no one living today would ever think about, right? Because who the hell has ever heard of the barley standard? And then the cool thing, you ever hear like you can eat your savings, and then you think about how disgustingly dirty money is. It actually used to be money, and you would eat your barley if times got tough so that you didn't starve to death. So that's where that saying comes from. Now, oats, Avena sativa, the cosmetic brand Aveeno kind of made it easy for you to remember the botanical name of oats, although they messed up the last letter. But Avena is the name, and it's so elegant. It just sort of blows in the wind. It dances. You can see why they call Chesmanthium sea oats, because it has a very similar flower structure. Oats have the deepest root system of all of the grains. So if you have really difficult compacted soil, oats would be what I would start with. And they actually are nutrient scavengers. So the roots go down and they draw nutrients back to the surface that will ultimately feed the next round of plants that you grow. Now, if you grow oats and peas together, they're actually considered to be a complete cover crop, where you have the cereal grain root system growing and then the legume nitrogen fixing action happening. And then, of course, to sow your wild oats actually meant to grow a crop that sucked. So it's kind of like what we call it, sowing your wild oats today. Maybe not exactly, but it's not a literal translation. So moving into wheat, Triticum aestivum is the workhorse. Wheat is really attributed to changing human civilization. I think all of the grains kind of equally contributed, but wheat definitely gets credit for all of it. It's grown on more land than any other crop in the world. It's grown on every continent except Antarctica. And actually, I think they're growing it in experiment stations now. Now, wheat actually has 13% vegetable protein content, and that's more than all of the other grains. And so this is why I get really offended when people get on their high horse about not eating wheat, specifically when they don't have a wheat allergy, because they're diminishing the nutritional value that this plant offers. And it shouldn't be ignored. We should just do a better job of not selling products that have been processed to the point of having no nutrition. You know, it's not wheat's fault, it's our fault for buying products and supporting industries that make it so the food we eat doesn't actually nourish us. Now, with wheat, stem strength is really important. Actually, it's important with all of these, but I learned the lesson on wheat. I like heirloom. I like ancient. It makes me feel better because, see, these are marketing terms that I didn't understand when I first started growing. So I spent a ton of money buying ancient grains that cost like 10 times as much as normal wheat, right? And all of it fell down in a spring storm. It just lodged. It literally broke at the base of the ground and it just flopped over on the ground. Now, if I was a farmer and my life depended on harvesting that wheat, I would have gone bankrupt, you know? And so I learned right then, okay, there's good and bad to modern breeding, but you know what? Stem strength matters when you're trying to feed the world, and you can't just have a crop collapse because you have a rainstorm in April. And so that's where, you know, the idea of genetic modifications, at least to a point, and really this isn't GMO, it was more traditional breeding that increased the chromosome count in wheat specifically so that the stalks would be sturdier. Now, there's some discussion that that chromosome change, which original varieties of wheat had like 6 chromosomes or 8 chromosomes, well, now they have 120. Well, it might be that that chromosome change has changed the gluten structure and is our bodies aren't actually able to break down that gluten. And that may be the cause of why so many people are having allergies and ultimately maybe leading to celiacs. Now, there is a lot that still needs to be discovered. And I was really frustrated that I didn't find more concrete information when I was writing the book about it, but that was my take on it. I think it might be a combination of things, including herbicide application and chromosome change. But I think that as home gardeners, we can experiment ourselves and maybe get together and start regionalizing our carbohydrate production so that we have better options and more nutritious greens to be able to eat. So just to give you an idea of what we get from our front yard stand, we average 25 pounds of ground flour every year. Well, every year that I grow it there. And that is a lot of flour, you guys. I have, actually the closet behind me is full of like 5-gallon drums of unground wheat seed. And so I just grind it as I need it. I guess I'm kind of a prepper. I didn't think of myself as one, but maybe I am. Now we do the whole process. Like we harvest it, we thresh it, we winnow it, we do it all the old-fashioned way. We got better grinders. At first we were doing hand crank grinders and poor kids were like pretty exhausted. So we did get electric grinders now, but we love to be able to show the kids the whole process of how you grow it and how you can eat it. And it's made them all much more appreciative of the resources that farmers, you know, offer our society. So you want to have clean seed to grind, and that's an important part of it. But the whole idea is that if I had 100 neighbors, I have 105 houses in my neighborhood. Everybody has an acre. So if 100 of those neighbors all did what I did, carve out just one section of turf in the middle of the sunny front lawn, we could collectively grow 2,000 pounds of grains for a local bakery to use or for a local brewery to start harvest or to be able to start brewing with. So there actually is some way to quantify this, that like we all have outrageous amounts of square footage devoted to grass that isn't providing anything. If we each just did 800 square feet, we could actually contribute to our community in a meaningful way. And this is just one neighborhood. You know, there are 10,000 new houses slated to be built in my tiny little suburb by the end of 2021. Think of how we could transform local food if we just used our stupid lots in these residential neighborhoods. So some grain companions, I've mentioned them a little, but I like to be a little bit repetitive so that it sticks. So some of the vegetable companions that I recommend, in this picture, the white flower is cilantro. Crimson clover and buckwheat are two of my favorite combos, and you can see that's a clump of barley behind that with Papaver somniferum. I've been told by my ag agent that I have to call it bread seed poppy for legal reasons. So they all grow really well together. These were all planted at the same time. Buckwheat is really awesome. If you don't want white buckwheat, you can actually grow rose red soba buckwheat. You can get that from Baker Creek Seeds. That's rareseeds.com. I'm missing an S, I've just noticed on that slide. So it's seeds plural. Now, larkspur is that, see, you guys get to grow bluebells. So you might not have to grow larkspur. But if you want, you could. The advantage of larkspur is that it's poisonous specifically to like deer and rabbits and groundhogs. You guys have much bigger animals than we do. Like, I don't want to have pigs come tear my whole yard up. So whenever people on the East Coast complain about deer, I'm like, oh, at least you don't have boars, you know, or moose, or, you know, what other people have in different parts of the country. But delphinium, or larkspur specifically, has been helpful for me in warding off some of those creatures that would otherwise eat all of the grains. And then poppies, I just think you can't go wrong with poppies. They're so pretty. You know, this is the poppy that you eat like on a bagel. It's also used for other things, but I don't do that. I just really grow them because I think they're pretty and the bees go crazy. Loving a mist or nigella is another really great companion. And carrots. I like to grow carrots mostly for their flowers. Though we do eat the roots, but I let a lot of them go to seed. That way I have this pretty floral display. Now moving into warm season grains, you might recognize this picture. That's again at Chanticleer, but this is a summer display with sorghum. And warm season grains are kind of self-explanatory. They grow in the frost-free months. They like hot temperatures, hot air, humidity. Typically you would sow them, you know, once your soil has warmed up, and then you would harvest before frost. So that includes corn, millet, rice, and sorghum. We're going to dive into each of these. Corn. As a Midwestern native, I actually studied corn genetics when I was in college. It's a very, very polarizing plant, maybe one of the most polarizing plants in 2021. I think it's really important, though. It is our only native cereal. And I like these stupid stats. It has an average of 800 kernels in 16 even rows. I mean, that's just kind of like nature is magic. There are over 3,500 different uses of corn, though. So, you know, it's not just for eating. It's, you know, obviously if you've pumped gas in the last 15 years, you've put corn into your gas tank. So, you know, it's often, it's bigger than just fresh eating corn, and the genetic modification discussion often gets misled because many of the modifications on corn are for non-human consumption. So they're not modifications that really impact our digestive systems because they're going to biofuels, or they're feeding, you know, cows or horses or pigs or whatever. So it's just, I would warn you to get to always do your research and recognize both sides of it before you get too on a idea that it's a really simple topic, because it's just not. I use corn in the least polarizing way. I use it like an exclamation point, because I am that person that basically talks in exclamation points. And I also design that way. And I think it's just really pretty. I just think it's awesome. There aren't a lot of plants that you grow that look like this in the middle of summer. And there it is, planted next to Asclepias tuberosa. So the monarchs can benefit from that, and then I can eat the corn that's planted next to it. And it's awesome. So rice, everybody looks at me like I'm from Mars when I say I grow rice. Now, I've already told you, like, I live where it never stops raining, at least lately. I grow rice really, really, really well. I would say in Texas, y'all probably need to do this in pots with no holes. The interesting thing about rice that's often misunderstood is that it doesn't actually have to grow in constant moisture. Paddies are there to hold water, but then also release water. The nice thing is rice is tolerant of saturation, whereas most of the weeds that would infest a rice field aren't. So you can flood the rice field and it'll kill all the weeds. So rice is not genetically modified for Roundup resistance because they don't need to use herbicides on it. All they have to do is put some water in. It's really awesome. Now, the day before 420 is National Rice Ball Day. And there's over 40,000 varieties of rice, but as an American, you will never, ever, ever, ever have access to all of those. In fact, I think you'll be lucky if you find 10 varieties of rice available from online seed sources. Now, it's a warm season grass. I think it's really pretty. I learned about growing rice from my friend who's from Laos, and he grows it in basically like boxed beds that he floods, and that's where I first got my rice seed from, and it's totally changed my life. But I realized pretty early on that if I wanted landscapers to do this, I was gonna have to trick them into it. So I started having them plant it. I pre-germinated it in 1-gallon pots, and then they planted it because they thought it was an ornamental grass. So I think they thought it was like Pennisetum. And they planted it in these places at country clubs with, coleus and begonias. And everybody thought it was so pretty. And at the end of the season, it went to seed, and I've never seen anything like it, And when I finally told them what it was like, asking for forgiveness instead of for permission. All of a sudden, everybody was like, wait, tell me about foodscaping. I want to learn more about growing food as an ornamental. So rice has oddly enough been one of my gateway plants. What you do to grow it in a pot, you just get a pot with no holes. Just don't drill any holes in it. I a lot of times do it with plastic just because they're lighter, so I can move them around. This is one I got at IKEA, so it has wheels, and I was just at IKEA the other day, and they still have them. So you just fill it with compost. Put your rice seed down, not rice seed from the grocery store, and then just keep it watered, and it'll grow all summer long. And the cool thing is, if you have a wood deck like I do, it won't drip water, and so it won't rot the wood. Whereas my normal containers that have drainage holes, we kept having to replace the wood underneath them because they would rot out. Now, the reason that I really like rice is because it doesn't collapse. And that's one thing that purple fountain grass is it has no structural integrity at all. So if you like the color of purple fountain grass, you can grow black madres. And you can find that from parkseed.com. And then in that picture on the right-hand side, so black madres is obviously the purple leaf. The green leaf is a heritage variety called Carolina Gold. And it's a disturbing story. We probably don't have time. I'm sure I've gone over. I'm sorry. But it is related to slaves bringing the seeds from Africa, and the people in Charleston only allowing slaves from a very specific part of Africa to come because they had all the knowledge in how to grow rice. Obviously, the white people from England didn't know how to grow rice. But rice is a big part of the Southeastern heritage and a big part of slave culture. Now, sorghum, another plant from Africa, but one that you don't have to grow in saturation. It's actually what Mary Poppins was singing about. Spoonful of sugar, she was not talking about white granulated sugar. She was talking about sorghum syrup because it is the highest in manganese and magnesium. And back in the 20s and 30s, people had pretty serious nutrient deficiencies. So you would actually get sorghum syrup from your physician. It's the most heat and most drought tolerant cereal grain, and I'm sure you're already growing it in Texas commercially. It's basically considered that it's going to outcompete corn by 2035 in global production. Corn is not really going to stand the time of climate change, but sorghum will. And the seeds are gluten-free. They're really delicious. And you can also crush the canes to get that sorghum syrup. And it'll grow really tall, 14 foot in less than 4 months. This was obviously my grain border in the summer. I like to mix it with things like sesame, amaranth, sunflowers, zinnias, things like that. And there's so much color variation in the seed that it's really, really ornamental. But the birds will come and eat it. It's like they know the second that it's ripe. And it's really, really amazing. But now another cool thing on sorghum is that you can actually see biocontrol in action. So you'll often get an aphid infestation on the leaves, but it doesn't matter because you're not eating the leaves. So just leave them. And then you'll see that the lady beetle larvae will come in and devour all of those aphids. And they're very, very efficient in what they do. They're much more efficient than we are at spraying pesticides. But even cooler than that is that the aphid honeydew will feed viceroys. So if you'd like to have this flourishing ecosystem, you actually have to have the aphids there. So they aren't always the enemy. Now, some companions with your warm season grains, you know, buckwheat, celosia, sesame, which is so beautiful, sunflowers, quinoa. Quinoa in Dallas. This is the first time I'd ever seen it live and in person. Dallas Arboretum really does a remarkable job in their new kitchen garden, and I just think that was the coolest thing ever. Sesame is one plant that I would really encourage all of you to try and grow. There's dark seeded and white seeded sesame. Dark seeded as a pink flower. And you just want to kind of let it go until frost, and then you'll know the seed is ripe and it just comes right out of the stalks. You can just knock it into a wheelbarrow or into a bucket, and then you can eat it, you can toast it and use it culinarily, or you can just save it and sow it the following season. So what else do I do with these grains? Well, I do a lot of decorating with them because I think they're pretty, but I also grind them and eat them. And I think if you're going to go through the effort of growing a lot, you should also eat them. I have two that I really recommend for grinding, the Wonder Mill and the KitchenAid. The KitchenAid grinder is for small batch. The Wonder Mill will do a pound of seed in 35 seconds. And it has 3 settings. So pastry, bread, and kind of like a cornmeal setting. But remember that this grain is whole grain. And it's not going to look like Wonder Bread. And the flour doesn't look like the flour that you buy at the grocery store. And that means you just have to shift your expectations for like the color of your cookies because they're going to be more brown. That's because they're full of nutrients. So there's actually 13 recipes in Gardening with Grains. And I worked with my friend who's a chef, and we came up with gluten-free recipes, vegetarian and vegan options. So there's a lot of cool things included. And this is where I buy my seeds. If you're interested in growing any of the plants I talked about tonight, somebody on this list will have them. Maybe you'll have to buy something different from every single place, because I'm sure that's what I do. If you want large quantity of grain seeds, Hancock Seed is the place to buy them from. You can buy them there by the pound versus buying them in individual seed packets. And I thank you for your time and for listening to me until this late in the evening. If you want to keep in touch, you can visit my website, and I do a monthly newsletter. I'm not very good at it, but I do it. But you won't get anything else from me. I promise I won't spam you. And if you just want to keep in touch on social media, I'm on Facebook as Brie Grows, and I'm on Instagram as Brie the Plant Lady. And I do a lot of videos showing this whole process on my YouTube channel, Brie the Plant Lady. So if you want to see exactly how I sowed that barley, there is a video that will show you exactly what I did. And I couldn't see the chat, but I can look at it now and see if there's any questions, or if you have any, you can just say them.
Yes, there's lots of questions in the chat. Okay,
good. Sorry. I should have opened it because I usually like to answer them in the moment, but hang on.
One question I have is, so my grain is about, in my wildflower seeds are about 12 inches tall right now. The winter stuff. Is this freeze going to just wipe that out?
Well, it's not going to hurt your grains, but it might hurt your wildflowers. Like, I don't totally know which wildflowers, like when you say wildflowers, are you seeing, are they like bluebells and things?
Right now I have, shoot, I have a list, but I think it's mostly like poppy, flax, Texas.
No, you should be okay with those.
They're just about to bloom. They have buds on them.
So I don't have well, I have one time where my poppies were blooming when we got to 19 degrees. It was the infamous Easter freeze of 2007. It started a whole cycle of chaos in the nursery industry. It killed all the dogwoods. It killed all the redbuds, but the poppies were fine. Like the crop that had zero economic relevance in the state of North Carolina didn't have any impact whatsoever. But the really valuable trees that nurseries were growing, they died to the ground. They never came back. So I think the wildflower, my inclination would be water them, like you said, Texas A&M recommended. You know, like that's what they do in Florida when it gets cold on the citrus fields. They just water them so that when it gets cold, ice encapsulates everything, and that acts as an insulator.
Just dripping with ice. Yeah.
Yeah, and ice is a really good insulator. So
that's why I read that part.
I would say irrigate heavily.
For what we should be thinking of. So I was thinking actually going through and covering everything and then coating them with water.
You know, the problem with that, and I've experienced this where I put like remay out and then we get ice, is it collapses everything because of the cover. So like in theory it's good, but once you get it heavy and wet,
about a month ago we had 3 inches of snow that stayed for a day or two. I did, but it was like the whole field, everything just thick full of ice, and I was like, oh no, my God. But it was all fine.
Yeah, I mean, you're better actually when you have cold weather to have precipitation with it versus it being like a dry, especially like a windy cold is far more damaging than ice or snow, you know. But I'm going to send my good vibes, as if that means anything. But, you know, in hopes that your forecast is going to keep getting better like my forecast has. Because, you know, when I saw 10 degrees last week on my phone, you know, I was just like, you know what, 2021, you suck worse than 2020. But now it's not 10 anymore. So I'm forgiving it.
It could change. It's true. So let's see. The first one was there's a place I heard about last year. Well, actually, we had a speaker from Barton Springs Mill who does grain here, who actually does the Carolina Gold.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah. And you can buy that locally at Central Market. And it's all Texas, I believe all Texas grown grains.
Oh, that is so cool. Now, see, we need some cool Texan to move to North Carolina and start doing that here.
And let's see, question, is that seed density how they would fall naturally in the wild, or is it more intense?
I don't know about in the wild, but it's about like how farmers would plant it without there being mechanical rows. Because, we call it sprinkling pixie dust. See, I do everything with kids. So, like, to keep a 5-year-old excited about laboring in my yard, we have to make it seem more magical. And so sprinkling pixie dust is better than sowing seeds.
I sprinkled my inkhorn seed in the fall, and a real good coverage, and the birds just swooped in and ate like almost everything. I went, okay, great. So maybe the density thing worked in that. I don't know. All right, so the next one is a fascinating article about the power of daikon radishes is in the
ooh, yeah,
in there that everybody might want to look at.
And by the way, daikon radish are really delicious, and you can use them like as an alternative to potatoes to make a gratin daikon, where you slice them thin and then make them not healthy by adding like heavy whipping cream and cheese and butter. But they're really, 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 really good.
They really clear your sinuses. They're really delicious.
Yeah, and they're giant. I have some pictures on Instagram of some that I should have harvested earlier, and honest to God, they were like as big as my face in width, and like 2.5 foot long.
Okay, so the next one is, will oats or other grains help clay soil? It's not exactly compacted, more than it's just clay.
Yes, so I would say they're the best way to amend clay because their roots will really help add more pore space. Like, clay, whether it's compacted or not, doesn't have the porosity just because the particles are so much smaller. And so anytime you can get a root system to sort of break that up and add better aeration, you'll ultimately have better ability to cultivate that soil. And so, yeah, I would start with oats, but you could do a mix of oats and barley, oats and wheat. And then in the summer, I would do sorghum. I didn't talk about millet just because I didn't grow millet really well until last year. And I didn't get a lot of pictures, but I have a big plan for millet this year. So
I actually grew millet this last year, and I have a blackland prairie soil, and it was terrible soil, couldn't get anything to grow. It took a long time. I amended it many times. And then in a plain old field, I sowed millet, and it was the best crop ever. Yes. A blackland prairie naturally grows grass well. Who knew?
Right. Isn't it funny when you just start thinking about it?
All right, so the next one, oats were considered to be animal feed by early settlers, and wheat became more fashionable.
And that was true in Europe as well. Like the kings preferred bread made from wheat versus oats, and peasants had to eat oats. Like, it's amazing the classism that came about. And oats are delicious and they're really good for you. And if you watched the Super Bowl last night, apparently there's an alternative to milk made from just oats now, which is pretty awesome.
And popular. Is larkspur poisonous to dogs? Or maybe that larkspur is poisonous. I don't know.
It's poisonous to everything. The good thing is I've never had a domesticated animal try to eat it. Like they sniff it and they instinctively know not to browse on it. Now that, and that goes for the deer and groundhogs. I have deer, groundhogs, and rabbits. And the reason that I grow the larkspur with my grains is to try and prevent those animals from eating all of the grains. Because if I grew it as just a monoculture, I would likely not get anything because they would come in overnight and just graze everything down. But the addition of larkspur has prevented that from happening. The main thing is, don't let kids eat it. Is honestly, dogs are often smarter than small children. And a lot of adults don't take responsibility for training their small children to make good decisions. And so it's important if you're growing larkspur that frankly you educate all of the people interacting in the space, as I would be more concerned about a person being stupid and eating it. It's nowhere near as poisonous as like monkshood. Like you're not going to drop dead from it, but you're going to feel terrible and probably want to go to the hospital. So don't eat it, you know.
All right, so growing corn, sorghum, and maybe millet for the first time this year. I'm really excited.
Yay! You'll have to send me pictures.
So then let's see, Angel posted your website and her book. And your book's on your website?
Books are on the website, yes.
Awesome. I'm gonna have to check that out. It says, I took notes as fast as I could, but missed so much. Is this presentation going to be available for later viewing? Yes, we're recording it now. My yard is full of weeds and grass. What do I need to do prepare for planting grains?
Well, if you can get the weeds under control, and I mean, what you want for real success is bare dirt. You know, whether it's your native dirt or it's soil that you've amended with compost. You don't really want to try and grow grains on top of lawn or, you know, in a bed that's already infested, because that's going to inhibit the germination rate. So, you know, if you can get the space cleared out, as soon as you get it cleared, sow your seeds, and then you won't have the opportunity for new weeds to start growing. That is always my philosophy. Any bed that I, you know, tend and then I don't immediately reseed, if I go back to it a week later, there's all new batch of things that are germinating that I don't want. So I always have the philosophy of I weed and I sow at the same time.
All right. So could you explain the
Dutch blue weed? I am, and for me, it didn't grow that well, but I still grow it. I buy it every week. It's the U-Trick Blue. You can get it from Botanical Interests. And it's not as pretty as it is in the botanical illustration on the seed pack, or at least it wasn't for me. It wasn't that blue. But this year I'm growing like black seeded barley, and I'm hopeful that is actually going to be black seeded. So how do you protect against birds?
Did you see the one about the vinegar?
Oh, I missed vinegar. Oh, okay. I'll get to that in just a second. So protecting against the birds when you sow on top of the soil. So I actually had this freak out moment about a month ago, and I put it on YouTube that I thought the birds had stolen all of my barley seeds. Because I was sitting on my couch, which is what I do because it rains all the time. And I'm just watching the blue jays out there scavenging around, and there's, you know, like 80 of them. And I was convinced that they had eaten all of it. And then like 3 days later, all of it germinated. So I'm not 100% sure that you can always blame the birds for stealing your seed, but I haven't done anything other than sit and worry about it. Um, I think because the main thing is you sow the seed of the wheat or whatever grain, and then you want to rake over with soil, whether you add more soil or you just rake it in to make sure that the seed has good contact with soil so that it'll germinate and not be right on the surface. I think that because it's actually covered up, the birds don't realize it's there. But I mean, I was 1,000% convinced they'd stolen my entire thing, my big, what I call the wave. I thought they'd eaten all of the seed that I planted. And they didn't. It's nice and bright green now, and it looks great. And I need to stop blaming birds, you know? Okay, so vinegar. Now, it was my extension agent that told me this. So vinegar is super caustic, and it will kill all the microbes in your soil, and it can actually impact soil pH. So if you're spot spraying in your garden with vinegar, you may say you have a neutral pH 7, like magic 7 garden soil. Anywhere that you have sprayed vinegar, that pH could actually go down to 4.5. Well, you can't grow vegetables in soil that's 4.5. Actually, you can't really grow much of anything. I mean, even azaleas and rhododendrons don't like acidic soil to that degree. So what she was basically explaining to me was like the caustic aspect of vinegar is that it, number one, has a really long-lasting impact on microbial activity in your soil base. So if you want your plants to be able to like feed themselves through the soil food web, you can't spray any, you can't apply synthetics, but you can't apply anything that's caustic either. So that's where you have to stick with organic matter. And so that's where all of her research, she's actually a soil scientist. So she was really concerned about people just like mass spraying vinegar over, you know, like entire properties, because it'll kill plants. It's effective. Like, it's not that it doesn't work. It's that there are long-term consequences that aren't present from using, you know, regularly available herbicides. And in most of the cases where people were wanting to apply it, it wouldn't have been that big of a deal for them just to like get on their hands and knees with a hoe or something and just hand remove them. And so like when people are wanting to create a whole new bed, I don't ever recommend herbicide. I don't recommend vinegar either. I recommend either renting or hiring a landscape contractor with a sod remover and use that piece of equipment to get to bare ground. So then you are starting with something that isn't going to make you hate the hobby of gardening. Because if you've ever had to hand remove turf in a massive amount of space, you might decide that this isn't something that you want to spend your free time doing. I've had to do that multiple times like as my job. And I had a lot of moments where I was really questioning why I spent $30,000 on a horticulture degree. So now when I want to make a new bed, I just rent the sod cutter from my local Home Depot. And I can do what I need, and it's just more efficient. And then I can use that sod somewhere else, or I can give it to a neighbor who has a bare patch or something, and it's not being completely wasted. And I'm not having to like break my back trying to get the space prepped.
We're all about the cardboard here.
Right. And see, and I'm surprised that works for you guys. That cardboard doesn't work here because our turf is spreading. It's stoloniferous and rhizomatic. And so the cardboard doesn't smother it. It just comes up through. Like in the Midwest, we could do that. Gosh, in the Midwest, we could just like turn it over and let the grass just like decompose in place and plant right on top of it. But we can't do that here. We have centipede, Bermuda, and zoysia grass primarily, and all of those things just boy, do they have a will to live. I swear they could probably live on the surface of the moon. Great that they don't need that much water and they don't need to be mowed every week, but they're very vigorous, and it makes it challenging for new bed development.
Are there any other questions?
Oh, I see one about you treated it for fire ants. You could put it like on a would you put it in a compost pile? I'm not sure that you should put it in a compost pile. Email me that question and I'll ask my extension agent. She loves it when people ask about vinegar. So, and I love her, and I like when I get to ask her questions. So,
Does anybody
I'll ask her what she recommends with that. Did it kill? Did it work? Did vinegar kill your fire ants?
I think. Hannah, are you still on?
Yes, I'm just figuring out how buttons work, but it did kill the fire ants actually. I have just a small backyard balcony that I had a pot on, and that's pretty much all I could think to do. So I had a higher concentration of vinegar though, so maybe that was why it killed them.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, it's recommended like for herbicide use of vinegar, it's 15% like white vinegar to a gallon of water, or 15% to whatever amount of water you have.
Yeah, so I was wondering, what's your email? Do you think you could post it in the chat or?
Oh, yeah. I did at the beginning, but let me do it again. It's just Brie like the cheese at briegrows.com.
Awesome.
Oh, wait, I'm sorry. I did it privately. Hang on.
So anyone else have any question?
Well, a further thought on the vinegar would be that it would seem that vinegar being very soluble, all you would need to do is apply a lot of water to flush and lower the acidity of the area by
In the pot.
dispensing with the vinegar.
Yeah.
So
Well, especially in a container where you don't really have microbes.
All right. Well, if there's no other questions, I see Sam, our next speaker, he was able to join us, and I was going to have him just introduce himself and invite everyone to come to our next meeting. Hey there, Sam. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, hello.
Hello.
Nice to meet you all. It was a great presentation. I really learned a lot and found a lot of things in common. Like we grow corn, of course, here in Oaxaca. And we've recently introduced sorghum as well. We have a herd of 60 cows. And now I'm like, oh, we should grow some millet. And with, the pandemic, we started to bake sourdough bread. And yeah, I'm like, oh, wow, this is the time to get our hands, from the soil to the table. And what I would like to talk about is about our relationship with corn, for instance. We're called the Benza, the cloud people of Oaxaca. And we farm in this traditional way that, let's say, our ancestors have developed for probably the last 10,000 years. And it has to do with reading the cloud patterns so that we can predict the rains and pick which week between the mid-June and the first 2 weeks of July you can plant corn in your specific field, because there's so many microclimates. It's like placing a bed most of the times. In what in Western like literature is called like dry farming. For us, it's spiritual farming, because by reading those cloud patterns, and we also have ancient rituals, to tune our connection from our bodies to the land, and through the corn plant, we're linked to the clouds and the rain patterns, thus closing the cycle that will feed our bodies and nurture our spirits. So I will delve a lot in this ancient history of corn and how it has evolved here, the way we do things as well, and also all the different uses of corn. It could be used to make dyes. It could be used, we make use of the whole plants to feed our animals, to wrap tamales, and all the other little plants that grow in the what we call the milpa system, which is it's the way in which the three sister seeds, corn, beans, and squash, plus all the other wild plants that grow in that ecosystem integrate, including grasshoppers like chapulines, and all the other trees, for example, the acacia trees that grow around there that break the soil and pull out nitrogen. So it'll be, I think, a really interesting conversation to exchange, this information and link the way we do things here further south, where it's a little bit of a different climate. And yeah, I hope to inspire you all to dive a little bit deeper, into all these plants and the ecology around us to extend that relationship, beyond the plants, to the weather pattern. And then, I mean, in our culture, it's linked even, to the I'm not too well versed on that, but people and my grandma used to read the night sky a lot, and read into the constellations, and to kind of feel intuitively, when the rains are coming, when they're stopping. So yeah, we'll talk about that, and then I would like to also show you guys a little bit of our work. We weave with wool, and we weave some of the symbols of this what do you call it, agroecology, and all this agriculture. A lot of seed patterns, mountains, rains, and the corn, the tree of life represented with a corn plant. It's woven into our textile art. So a lot of topics, and I hope I'll have enough time to
See my Oaxaca shirt?
Oh yeah, I see that. Yeah. So yeah,
I had no idea you were going to be here.
Up.
That's great.
Yeah, on March 8th. I get it right, Angel?
Yes, March 8th. So the second the second Monday of the month. So March 8th at same time, 6:00. And yeah, I think I added you to our email list, Brie. So we hope you come back.
Yes. Yeah, I'm excited, and I'm gonna watch this video again, and because I missed the first part, but yeah, it sounds amazing, and I'm really happy to be part of this community, and yeah, I'm looking forward to that date.
We can't wait. Make sure.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much.
So Brie, we're so appreciative. Having a grain lecture is so rare for us. We're really thrilled to talk about something that carbon sequesters and is good for climate change, growing grasses and cover crops, and real practical information on how to do it very specifically, because it's a rare lecture that to hear about that. So we're very appreciative.
Well, thank you so much for having me. This was
the magic
awesome.
of Zoom is we don't have to have people in person, and it can be from anywhere. It's so magical.
Well, and when I do come back to Austin, maybe it'll be so that we can all be together.
Yes. And I have to say, my sorghum plant had lived almost through the whole winter and just recently died. It's really that tough.
They're tough as nails.
Crazy. So a milder winter, it might have made it. Thanks everybody for coming, and it was a fun night.
Yeah, thank you so much, Brie. That was wonderful. And everybody keep a lookout for info about our plant sale. Share it out with your friends and neighbors. We want to make it a good one this year, even though we can't do it in person. So yeah, thanks again for coming, everyone.
Thanks,
Night.
everybody.
Good night.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.